How's it going, everybody? My name is Grant, and I'm going to be talking you through the basics of Rapidminer, which is a data mining software used for some basic data analytics purposes. I know that sounds a little intimidating, but I promise it's not too complicated. So this is just what you get when you pull up a blank new page in Rapidminer Studio. So I'm on the design view, and that's where we're going to be spending a lot of our time, as well as the results view. Everything else is going to be a little more complicated, and we're not going to touch on it this video. So don't worry, it's not too complicated. Over in the top left, you just have your new, your open files, and your save up here. And this is going to be your run button, which I'm going to get to in just a second when we talk about the processes. This is your repository on the left side over here. This is where your data comes from. So some computers might be connected to a database. This is your sample data, so if you want to play around with something, you can get a ton of data from here. It's great. And then your local repository or your hard drive of your computer. Down here we have our operators, and this is where Rapidminer gets its strength from. Rapidminer is a actually very powerful piece of data mining software, which we're going to use to take data and mine information from it to use for different strategies or something like that. This can be for a large company or for you personally. It really just depends on what you want to get out of your data. The operators are here for transforming the data in various different ways. There's tons of different options here, and they can be combined in tons of different ways, and that's where Rapidminer gets its power from. The parameters window over here is more of an extension of the operators. It's what they're affecting. It's kind of the details of each operator. I'll show you more how the operators work and how the parameters affect them in a little bit, but just know that these kind of play off of each other. And then down here we have the help window, and usually I don't talk about help windows, or to be completely honest, use help windows in a lot of pieces of software. Google does the job just fine. But in Rapidminer, they have a ton of information here that can be really useful, like why things aren't working or what kind of file types or data types have to be used for different things. It's really useful to look over the help window, and I just wanted to take a minute to highlight it, because if you find yourself lost, I guarantee you the answer is buried somewhere in here. So I'm going to pop over to the results window because I'm only going to be bouncing between these two today. It's just a basics video, so I don't want to get too in-depth here. And over at the results, I'm going to import some data. So let's go to my computer, and I'm going to go to my downloads because I have a file in mind. Let's see if I can pull it up. There we go. And we're going to get to the first big step of data analysis, and that is going to be the quality of your data and what it looks like as far as consistency and accuracy. Up here is just the kind of file definitions, or how the file is depicted. So different decimal characters might register differently in different file types. So you want to make sure your file matches up with everything. Rapidminer likes to tell you no problems, and over here most of the time it's right. I'm going to go over to the format though, and that's where I actually want to play around with some things. So if you see the data in front of me, it looks like an Excel spreadsheet. It's pretty simple. There's a lot of things going on, and you can tell I have a decent bit of data going on, about 100 rows, and more than a few columns or categories. The first one I want to talk about is client key, and if you've ever had any kind of database knowledge or experience, you know that this is probably going to be our primary key. If you don't know what that means, that's okay. A primary key is just a primary way to identify a row or a set of data to differentiate between them. Think of it as like the name. An easy way to differentiate different people, in this case, as we're looking at homelessness, is going to have them with unique numbers so we can tell them all apart. As you can see, there's a lot of 22-year-old females who aren't veterans, and it gets really hard to differentiate the individuals from the data if you don't have a primary key. And in Rapidminer, I actually want to tell it that that is the role of this column or category. So I'm going to go over to change role here, and if I click over here, you can see I have label, ID, and weight, and this is going to be the ID role. It identifies the data, but it also takes it out of the analysis because it doesn't really help me if I know the average of all these numbers. They're just there to identify each data set or each person in this instance. There's a few other things I want to mess around with too. The type of data. You can see this below the category. For example, age is obviously an integer. Gender, not really a polynomial in this situation. I would actually classify it as a binomial. I know that might be a little narrow-minded, but for this data set, there are only two options, so that's what we're going to go with. For anything that is yes or no, that is also binomial. So we're going to come over here and change all of these yes and no's or y's and n's, depending on how they were inputted, to binomials, just to make my job a little bit easier. Now, if let's say you just hammered through and hit next, you can use the operators that I'm going to show you in a minute to do this at a later stage, or undo this if you really want to. But for this example, we're just going to go ahead and change all those to binomials that are, give it a once over, everything looks good, hit next. I'm going to save this in my data. It's homelessness 2. And there we go. This is the data that we just saw. And you can see there's a few more things going on here. So I want to talk about the statistics page before we go any further. This is going to give you each category of data and a little bit of information breaking it down. We haven't done any real processing yet, but we can still do some analysis just from this window. This is also a really great place to find some errors. It has a missing category that tells you of empty spaces that aren't being utilized or weren't answered completely. And you can see this category right off the bat. Boom, 49 missing cells. So that's kind of a red flag for that category. We're also going to make sure binomial categories don't have 3 answers, and that everything lines up. There's no outliers standing out at us, obviously. I'm sure we can find some more as we dig. But yeah, look at that. Income. You can see we already have some pretty big outliers out there. That's okay. We can do something about that. So just to keep breaking down this results window, we also have our visualizations, and I'm going to play with this towards the end of the video. You can have different kinds of graphs and plots to display your data when you want to analyze it more in depth. We're not going to play with this quite yet. First, we want to actually do something with our data. So let's go over to the design view. And this is our big process window. This is where everything is going to happen. So first I'm going to take our file, which is homelessness2. I'm going to drag that into the process window. That's our data that we saw on the results page. Nothing's happened to it yet. And the first thing I want to do, I want to apply some operators. So I'm going to type in missing because I want to replace some missing values. So I'm just going to drag that guy over there. And then you can see the parameters window has changed a little bit. So let's see, what do I want to replace? This filter type is which categories of data do you want to apply that to? And I'm going to apply it to a subset. That means a few specific ones. Ooh, let's connect our data so it makes a little sense. So let's see. We have age and we have income. All right. Now that we have that, how are we going to replace these missing values? We're going to take the average. We could do various other ones, but in this instance, we're going to take the average and apply that to the value cell. So it fills in the missing data with the average of the entire set. Now this is great, but we also remember we had some outliers in some of these categories, and that could really mess with our average. So let's detect some outliers. Now, if you don't know what LOF stands for, local outlier factors, the help option is really helpful in telling you which one of these you want to actually pick. I think I want this one. So let's go ahead and apply it, and we can see the order which we want to apply these things. We want to detect this outlier first. So let's go ahead and draw this here, and then draw it to replace missing values. Connect it to the end right there, and then we can run this bad boy. All right, sounds good. Now we can see our data set. We have filled in all of our missing values, and it gave us a little outlier column to look at to see if there is anything crazy going on. Now this is the standard deviations, I believe, of how far away an outlier is from the median of the data. Now, you might be asking yourself, that's great, but what can I really do with all of this? This doesn't seem very useful. What you can do with it is you can remove outliers if you need to. You can fill in missing data or delete it depending on how you want to, and then you can analyze that data. That comes into data analysis. So if I want to take age and income and have different colors for gender, I can go ahead and look at a graph and see if anything applies or is correlated together. What if I wanted to do number of nights homeless and income? You might see more of a correlated trend. And this is the power of Rapidminer, and what you're looking to do with data analytics is you take your data, you can transform it or identify it in different ways and get an answer through it. All right, I'm going to add one more operator today, and I'm going to do an average. And that's going to be in the aggregate functions over here. So if I just apply that right here, I can edit the list of functions that this affects. I want to find the average age of these homeless people that we took a survey of. So go ahead and run the function, and I get my average age of 41 years old. That's great. So if I want to make a report based on my findings, I can go ahead and apply all of this information that I found and make a analysis based off the information. It's important to remember that if you find two pieces of data that are correlated, that doesn't mean that they cause each other to happen. Correlation does not equal causation, one of the basic rules of statistics. A few other things. It is important to have a kind of a direction of where you want to go with your data before you start. But at the same time, it's also very important not to have an answer in mind while you're analyzing data. It's important to stay as unbiased as possible and let the data speak for itself. There are very many cases of people having their own bias come in and affect the analysis of the data and lead people to make incorrect conclusion about what's going on and which data is correlating or impacting other sets. That's it for the basics of Rapidminer today. There is a lot more power you can get out of these operators, including forecasting data, applying other data sets to new data to see what people might have for buying trends, and etc. There are several marketing strategies that can be made for small businesses or large businesses using software just as simple as this. That's all for today, and hope you all have a great day. Thank you.